Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. You're watching Perspective. I'm your host, Rumah Khalid Bhatt. And today we're going to discuss the gamut of relations that exist between the United States of America and Pakistan. There have been ups, there have been downs, there have been allegations, and there have been a lot of unnecessary gestures from the United States of America as far as Pakistan is concerned, despite the fact that Pakistan has always been complying as far as the international affairs are concerned or Pakistan's international obligations are concerned, especially when it comes to the neighboring countries and Afghanistan. Pakistan has been primordial when it comes to Afghanistan, when it comes to the Afghan peace process. It was because of Pakistan's efforts that the Afghan Taliban and the then Afghan government came together for talks in Doha, and it was the United States of America that had requested Pakistan to initiate these talks. Afterwards, once the Afghan Taliban took over in August and subsequently when the United States left Afghanistan, there have been a lot of allegations from the United States side as far as Pakistan is concerned. Pakistan has always denied them and has always been quite vehement as far as its point of view is concerned. Now, there have been certain delegations that have been arriving from the United States of America as far as the ties or the cooperation or bridging those gaps between the US and Pakistan is concerned. The latest in that spate were 4 senators that came from the US to Pakistan. They met with the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Imran Khan Saab, and also with the Chief of the Army Staff, Qamar Javed Bajwa Saab. And of course, there was a need to further strengthen the cooperation or the bilateral relationship between the two countries. And of course, Afghanistan was also on top of the agenda. At the same time, we also know, and the United States also understands Pakistan's point of view on Afghanistan and the efforts that Pakistan has made and the need to provide aid and humanitarian help to Afghanistan at the earliest before it becomes too late, because winter is on the outset and Afghanistan is plagued with the human and economic crisis as we speak. There is a lack of food, there's a lack of proper shelter, and there is a lack of money. And there are funds that have been withheld by the United States of America as far as the Afghan money is concerned, because it wants Afghanistan to comply with certain necessities or certain protocols that it has asked or the West has asked. At the same time, coming on the local front, there is also the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan that says that it has aligned itself with the Afghan Taliban, which the Afghan Taliban have denied. Nevertheless, a month has passed since the month-old ceasefire had been declared by the TTP, and that 1 month has passed away, and the ceasefire no longer exists by the TTP. Is that going to create an issue in the days to come, or will the deal between the government and the TTP take a new turn for the better? Will the TTP comply with what Pakistan has asked them? This is also something that we would like to understand and will be asking by our guests during the course of our show. We've been joined by 3 important guests for this show. 1 is in the studios and 2 are online. In the studios, we've been joined by Dr. Nazir Mahmood. He's a foreign affairs expert. Dr. Saab, thank you very much to have joined us. It's a pleasure to have you here on this show to understand your perspective of these international affairs that are paramount to Pakistan. Online, we've been joined by Brigadier Retired Saad Mohammed. He's a senior analyst. Brigadier Saab, thank you very much to have joined us. We've also been joined by former Ambassador Asif Durrani Saab, and of course we'll be asking him as well about what his perspective on the relationship between the US and Pakistan is concerned. Let's begin with Dr. Nazir Mahmood Saab. Nazir Saab, when it comes to the United States and Pakistan, just like Afghanistan, there have been a lot of ups and downs. There have been strong cooperation between the two countries. There have been allegations. There have been different restrictions that have been put by the United States over time as far as Pakistan is concerned. Where is all of this leading now in this current day and age? We have Afghanistan that is plagued by humanitarian and economic crisis. We have issues with our not so friendly country, India. And we have a certain tangent of relationship with the US where there is a certain aspect of it that consists of allegations. Where are we going as far as our relationship with the US is concerned?
Well, to me, prognosis is not very positive. Because if the past 4 or 5 years, why I am saying 4 or 5 years is starting from Trump's term in 2017, then onwards we have had topsy-turvy relationships with the United States. As Trump sided more towards, tilted more towards India, and there was kind of a bonhomie with Modi, between Modi and Trump. Then onwards, we see that the American attitude towards Pakistan also drastically changed.
But
So
the
this
American
was
attitude towards Pakistan has also changed in the past, has become warmer, then has become colder, and now again it is, we don't understand where it is going at this moment.
Well, as I said that, I don't see an immediate warming of relation in near future, because now Pakistan's relation with US are, sadly, I would say, unfortunately, are determined by the factors in Afghanistan and China. What is happening in Afghanistan, that is having a direct impact on Pak-US relationship, and how China and US are relating to each other, that is also impacting on Pakistan. So this is an unfortunate reality, and somehow we also have not been able to extricate ourselves from these two important factors, Afghan factor and the Chinese factor.
Why can't, why isn't it possible to balance all these three factors?
That is the key, that is the challenge, and ideally Pakistan should be aiming at that. But recently, Pakistan, what signals, Pakistan should also be sending, positive signals. In my opinion, this Pakistan's refusal to participate in democracy summit was not a wise decision.
All right.
Yes. Because anyway it was a virtual conference, and there are more than 110 countries participating in that conference. Participation by Pakistan would have sent a positive signal.
All right.
But Pakistan did not send that signal. Why? Because of close relationship with China. So that's what I am saying, that Pakistan should be, you were also right when saying you should be balancing those relationships, because again, as Prime Minister himself said, that Cold War, a new Cold War is emerging, and two blocs are emerging once again after 30 years. We had, 30 years back, that Cold War ended, 1990-91, and after 30 years, a new Cold War between US and China. Now, in this Cold War, Prime Minister was right when he said that we would not like to be part of one bloc. In the previous Cold War, Pakistan was very clearly part of the US bloc. But then, refusing to participate in that democracy summit was not a wise decision, because if we want to balance, we should not be sending a signal that this we are doing at the behest of China, because China was very happy and China openly appreciated that decision. And this reminds me of another decision we made. If you remember the conference in Malaysia, initially we announced that we would go. Prime Minister was in Saudi Arabia, Shah Mahmood Qureshi was in Saudi Arabia, then we came back, we announced that we would participate, but suddenly when we got the hint that Saudi Arabia was not happy at our participation in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur, remember that? And then we didn't go there. So what that shows? That shows that we are not making our decisions independently. Either we make our decision to please Saudi Arabia, in Malaysia's case, at this particular moment not participating in that summit to please China. This is not the right approach. So that is my take on it.
All right. Brigadier Asad Mohammed Sahab, as far as Prime Minister is concerned and its relationship with China and the US is concerned, he has said, and I quote, that Pakistan desires to bridge the gaps between US and China instead of joining any bloc. Now, has the message gone through to the necessary quarters, whether it be the United States of America or China, that Pakistan wants to bridge gaps and not join any bloc?
I think this is a very far-fetched objective for Pakistan to bring two powers. One is a superpower and the other is an emerging superpower. To bridge their gaps. I don't think so. It's a feasible or achievable objective. We talk about non-alignment, and the Prime Minister rightly pointing out that there are two blocks now coming up again, and we might go to a bipolar world very soon if we haven't gone there already. But this non-alignment is a myth, which even in the previous case, when the Soviet Union and the United States were superpowers, we will see that there was no real non-alignment. If you look at Cuba, it was tilted towards the Soviet Union. If you look at Jamal Nasser of Egypt, he was tilted to the Soviet Union. Look at India, it was tilted to the Soviet Union. And there were countries which were tilting to the United States, which included Pakistan also, when it later became the member of the non-aligned movement. Today, the United States looks at India as a strategic partner. and it wants to achieve certain objectives in Southeast Asia and in the Pacific region. So for that, they look at India as a counterbalance to the Chinese. So supporting that view or going with that view, and a country like Taiwan participating, which is not recognized by Pakistan, which is not recognized by the People's Republic, I don't think so it would have been advisable for us to participate in a summit which I don't think so has any major objectives or any interest for Pakistan these days. Democracy is our democracy. We do it what Pakistan feels is right. And mostly now democracy is being used by these Western powers for their own political ends. They want to achieve certain, they have certain interests and they use democracy as a tool. China may not be a democracy in the Western sense, but they call themselves a republic. It's a one-party rule, but they do call themselves a republic, and that's the Chinese way of democracy. No other country has a right to accuse China of not being democratic or not giving people human rights or something. That's for China's own internal matter. Now, for the case of Afghanistan, that this discussion came up that we have the United States is unhappy with Pakistan. Well, the United States has been unhappy with Pakistan for many times over the past, 65 to 70 years when we have been.
Remember the Presley's amendment as well in the past. There have been other restrictions on Pakistan as well.
So these ups and downs have been there. We have a history of relationship with the United States, and I think that will continue. It has a long history. Pakistan and the United States have been allies, and it has given benefits to Pakistan, and annoying the United States at this point, I don't think so is a good idea or wisdom in that. So we should pursue good relations with the United States. But what needs to be explained to the United States is that its own deeply flawed policies are bringing these problems in the region. For example, when 9/11 took place, no Afghan took part in the 9/11 attacks. So Afghanistan was made a scapegoat, and Mr. Bush had to do something. Despite Pakistan's warnings of wait and let's see how the game is played out, the United States was in a hurry. And it started the invasion of Afghanistan along with its other allies in NATO. Now, when again they captured Afghanistan, Pakistan again advised them that giving power to the Northern Alliance, the erstwhile Northern Alliance, is not a good idea. Again, the United States.
All right, now, Brigadier Saab, this brings me to a very interesting point. This brings me to an interesting point as far as Afghanistan is concerned. Now that the US has left Afghanistan more or less, do you feel that it still wants to dominate Afghanistan directly or indirectly or control it one or the other? And that is why the rule of the Afghan Taliban, with certain issues that it has with it, is something that the US government is not agreeing to, and that is one of the major reasons why the aid has been blocked.
Yes, in Afghanistan, the US interest is still there, and they want Pakistan's, permission to somehow influence their intervention in Afghanistan. They may not be looking for some ground action or bases that I don't think so they had demanded, and the government has also, I think, said in a way that there were no demands as such. However, over the horizon, interference in Afghanistan, the US is still looking at that. It has got allies in certain pockets in Afghanistan, and they would not like those pockets to be eliminated by the Taliban. There could be terrorist bases in Afghanistan. The IS is becoming a big challenge in Afghanistan. It's becoming a big challenge to the Afghan administration that is now in Kabul. So the United States would like to keep an eye on Afghanistan, and for that, Pakistan's partnership is very essential. Now,
but on one hand, that is something I'd like to understand from you as well. On the one hand, the US wants to check Afghanistan and wants Pakistan to help it in that respect as well. On the other hand, it controls the money, the aid to Afghanistan, which brings it to a certain humanitarian or economic crisis, and which leads it to go towards certain measures that are not how should I say, that should not be pursued by Afghanistan, and that would lead to further turmoil. Don't you feel, sir, that this needs to kind of be curtailed before it's too late? This question I'm going to ask from my third guest, Ambassador Asif Durrani Sahab. You must be hearing my conversation with my last two guests. What would you like to say? What would your input be as far as the US take on Afghanistan is concerned, and the fact that it is still withholding aid when the first thing that it needs to do right now, even though it does not have political affiliations with Afghanistan, is to release at least one part of that money so that Afghanistan does not go into a humanitarian crisis?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think United States would give aid to Afghanistan, but the volume could be far less than expected of its size, its economy, and the wherewithal it has got. So they would give, but as Brigadier Saad has rightly pointed out, that right now the geopolitical situation is such that the United States may be feeling isolated in the immediate neighborhood of Afghanistan, especially with regard to the over-the-horizon access which the United States wants. That is only possible through Pakistan, and I think it would not be forthcoming. And you have already seen that Pakistan has not participated in the Democracy Summit. So it is also a clear signal that United States, if they want a transactional relationship with Pakistan, then perhaps those days are over. Yes, there will be, if there are meeting of interests, common interests, then perhaps the two countries may talk to each other. Otherwise, perhaps they will not, would not like that. So the polite manner Pakistan has declined to attend the summit is part of that. Now, coming back to the humanitarian assistance, I think it is a chicken game played between the United States and the other bloc led by China and Russia. And so it all depends that how the immediate neighbors of Afghanistan, they react, and particularly with regard to recognition of the Taliban regime. And United States and its Western allies, including India, they are on one side, and they would formulate their own responses. But here, immediate neighbors of Afghanistan, plus Russia, Turkey, and some of the Gulf states, they are going to take a stance, which in the coming days, especially on 19th December, when the Voices ministerial meeting will be held, that would be held. I think there would be two major agenda items. One is recognition of Taliban, and second is humanitarian assistance.
So now, before we come to the OIC, I'd like to understand the visit of these 4 US senators to Pakistan, and they've met with the Prime Minister and they've met with the Chief of the Army Staff, and they talk about maintaining broad-based ties with Pakistan. Under all of the circumstances that, of course, relate to the Pakistan-US tangent of relationship, is it important, this visit of these 4 senators, or is it more of a routine matter just to check what Pakistan is doing as far as the region is concerned?
No, I think these senators have, since they, all 4 of them are members of the Congress's Intelligence Committee. So the primary task would be to see the Afghanistan issue and have a word with Pakistan. And one of them is also a member of the Armed Forces Committee member. So the composition of a delegation itself is quite clear, and I think they will be discussing again these twin issues. One is recognition of Taliban, and second would be the humanitarian assistance, or how to go about in future with Afghanistan or the Taliban-led dispensation. So these are the two major issues, which are in fact a point of discussion between all the interlocutors at the moment. Yes.
All right. Dr. Nazir Mahmood Sahab, Asif Durrani Sahab points out at the tangent of talks as far as these 4 senators are concerned, and of course he talks about the importance, the positions that these 4 senators hold as well. So if they talk about US's aid for Afghanistan, Pakistan's role, and of course the humanitarian crisis, do you feel we could see some kind of an aid reaching very, very soon to Afghanistan, or maybe that is the reason why these 4 senators are here?
There can be one reason. I agree with Ambassador Saab that there may be some aid, and if you remember just today, World Bank has also announced that a couple of $100 million are in the pipeline for Afghanistan, but a couple of $100 million, 200 or 280 million dollars, this is not a big amount. What this amount will do, this amount will come definitely, because if there is a humanitarian crisis at a large scale, because food insecurity is widespread, 40 million people, 4 crore, 40 million people is a big number. And according to some reports by World Food Organization and even UN reports, half of the population is insecure in terms of food supply, which is a big number. So of course, Western powers also want to avoid that. So the aid, that amount will come, but that amount will be barely enough for the people to survive winter. This will not bring much prosperity. This will provide temporary relief for the winter, and I don't see, without any other major help, Afghan economy is not going to kick start, because Afghan economy, as we know, 70 to 80% of Afghan budget was provided by the Western powers, America, European Union, and other countries. Now that support is withdrawn now, August onwards. Now in the absence of that support, how Afghan 40 million people live there, how Afghan economy is going to survive, that is the major question. And that question was there all along. But why weren't there any preparations made, Nazir Saab, as far as the future of Afghanistan is concerned, looking at these implications? Who would make the preparation? Because Afghan Taliban are a militant group. They were a militant group. There is no two opinion about that. This is a militant group which went there, and then the Afghan.
But Nazir Saab, the US spent trillions of dollars in Afghanistan during these 2 decades. We don't see any sign of where that money went.
Well, there are 2 aspects to that. One, half of the money went back to contractors.
All right.
Mostly this money, trillions of dollars, they were spent either on providing military hardware, guns, and preparing Afghan army, Afghan National Defense Force, and secondly some infrastructure projects. They built roads, they built some bridges and things like that. But economy does not, only partially economy depends on these things, but for economy to survive, either you have some developed industry. If industry is not there, some developed agriculture, that is not there. In the absence of these things, the economy is going to go down. And the preparation that you are talking about, the preparation could only be done by Afghan Taliban themselves if they were planning to occupy.
But what I'm trying to understand is, Nazir Saab, wasn't there any anticipation by the West as to one day they are going to move or leave Afghanistan? What is going to happen afterwards?
I don't think that they expected this quick downfall of Ashraf Ghani government. This was also surprising for them. What they expected that they would withdraw and the Ashraf Ghani government would continue. Or at the most, Afghan Taliban would be able to occupy some more districts or some more provinces, and the war would go on in the peripheries. I think that's what their expectation was.
Okay.
That's why there was no preparation from their side also.
All right. Brigadier Saad Muhammad Saab, when it comes to Afghanistan, US, and of course Pakistan, and the coming OIC conference that Pakistan is also hosting, and the role of the OIC, do you feel all these factors are involved as far as Afghanistan is concerned, or any possible future, peaceful future to some extent of Afghanistan is concerned, could be helpful for Afghanistan? What do you foresee as far as Afghanistan is concerned?
Look, I see the OIC is a toothless sort of an organization. Here, I don't think so we can expect anything tangible from the OIC to come forward. It does not have the power to recognize Afghanistan, because unless the United States and its major NATO allies in Europe agree to that, some of the Arab countries will not be in a position to say that we want to recognize the present setup in Afghanistan. So for that, a broad consensus will be required. The humanitarian aid also, if it's not recognized, the Afghan government is not recognized, even humanitarian aid will have to go through other channels rather than going through the present Afghan government in Kabul. So I am not very optimistic as to what the OIC can really do in this environment. But this visit that you were talking about of the 4 senators, I look at it, that is very important, and especially for Pakistan to have explained as to how, because the United States, since it was just mentioned that, Senate Armed Services Committee member and others are in the Intelligence Committee. So they would be looking at Afghanistan as to how it pans out in the future. What are the challenges that Afghanistan is facing? What are the terrorist prospects of making a base again in Afghanistan? Will the instability lead to destabilizing the region or stretching up to the American allies in Europe? Now that Pakistan should have exploited, and I'm certain they must have done it also, that the biggest challenge that the Afghan government today, the Taliban government that is facing, is the IS challenge. It's a very important challenge. Now, IS is not only a threat to us, to the region, and to Europe and the United States. So unless we help the Afghan Taliban to come to grips with this challenge, this threat will, expand. On how that could be done is that the Taliban would be requiring intelligence to move against this terrorist group. The other is that they must have resources to fight this menace. And that can only be done if the Afghan government gets its foreign exchange reserves and it gets some recognition at some point in time. So that would have facilitated Pakistan also. The Afghan government would have been able to stabilize the country so that it does not remain a threat to the rest of the world and the region. I think Pakistan needs to exploit this aspect. The other is the humanitarian crisis. Now, if the Afghan government faces this humanitarian crisis and it escalates and destabilizes the country, it will help only the IS. It will destabilize the region. So this is where Pakistan's and the United States interest and the Taliban interest, they coincide. And that is to stabilize Afghanistan. To get stability, it needs recognition. Before recognition, it needs humanitarian aid. It needs its foreign exchange reserves for it to function as a modern country.
All right. Asif Durrani Saab, a lot of issues that pertain to Afghanistan and a lot of commonalities, as Brigadier Saab has ably pointed out, but a lot of issues including the IS that plague Afghanistan and the region as well. Russia is one country that had talked very early about the implications of the IS gaining strength in Afghanistan is concerned. Despite the fact that there are certain issues that continue to exist between Afghanistan and the West, especially when it comes to women's rights or it comes to other issues due to which the Afghan Taliban government is not being recognized as we speak. Don't you feel that countries such as the United States or other countries in the West or the EU could kind of put that on the side and work towards at least strengthening Afghanistan so that issues such as the IS, issues such as the TTP do not gain strength in the country?
I think we should be clear about a couple of things. Number one, United States is least pushed to what happens in Afghanistan if the people die of starvation. The United States is responsible for the killing of 500,000 people in Afghanistan and Iraq, and there's no remorse. Secondly, when you talk about Daesh or ISIS, in Afghanistan, their number is not big. At the same time, China and Russia, they may express the concern, but they can look after their interests in Afghanistan. United States, it's just not Daesh, because Daesh There are many suspicions, especially Russians have been quite skeptical about the American role vis-a-vis Daesh's presence in Afghanistan. Daesh took roots in Afghanistan under the U.S. watches. So here, there are a lot of suspicions about the United States role. So for United States, tackling Daesh or ISIS would be secondary. For them, yes, geographical access to Afghanistan, that is important. But for that to happen, I think the United States will have to enter into some kind of quid pro quo, and that is that America, Pakistan, and Taliban, they can evolve a modus vivendi, of course, with the consultation of China and Russia. Reason being that the United States, if they want to go unilateral, then that would raise suspicions, and Pakistan should not side with that. Pakistan should not be the party with that. And I think Taliban would also see the game in this manner. So we have to be very cautious. Here, if at all the United States is interested in tackling with Daesh or Al-Qaeda, so they have to have a common platform and a consensus of the important states that are involved, especially Troika Plus. And then they have to route through the UN Security Council, because whatever Daesh or Al-Qaeda we are talking about, they are under the UN Security Council resolutions, so those are to be tackled accordingly. So here, if the pressure comes on Pakistan, Pakistan should also adopt the same route, that it has to come through the UN Security Council route. And because Americans cannot be the sole champions of fighting the terrorism, it is a universal phenomenon, so all the countries have the responsibility to fight terrorism. So, one. Secondly, when you talk about humanitarian assistance and others, there'll be a bare minimum allocation, so they could subsist on that allocation. Major reason is that even if there is no aid, Afghanistan cannot survive because its banking system is totally paralyzed. Their banks cannot function. They cannot, process letter of credits or do business with the outside world. So that would be the major challenge for the Afghan government to deal with that. And regarding women, yes, that is a very important point. And there, I think Taliban cannot defend their position. Even in the Islamic world, they cannot defend their position the way they are treating the women, or they are likely to treat the women. So therefore, I think Taliban, we have to counsel Taliban. All the member states have to counsel Taliban, whosoever are in touch with the Taliban, that if they have to be part of the international community, so they have to throw out their island mentality and have to be the part of the world. And the women, they cannot treat them as half citizens. Yes.
All right. Dr. Nazir Mahmood Saab, Ambassador Asif Durrani Saab talked about all the countries that need that have the responsibility to collectively fight all aspects of terrorism. Now, speaking of terrorism, we have confronted terrorism through major wars, through major challenges in the last few decades. One of the aspects that has been on the forefront as far as those terrorism challenges is concerned is the TTP. Now, the Pakistan and the TTP, the Pakistani government and the TTP came into a ceasefire agreement that started on the 9th of November. A month has passed, and now the ceasefire agreement is no more. There are certain allegations that the TTP is also putting up as far as Pakistan is concerned. Nevertheless, the TTP continues to remain an organization that has not been fruitful for Pakistan as far as its security apparatus is concerned over the last few decades. We don't know what's going to happen in the future, and we don't know what their current mindset is. But how important do you feel is for Pakistan to move on this angle as well, and very swiftly, in order to bring peace nationally, and in order for the TTP to understand also that the only way forward is for them to reconcile and concile with the constitution of Pakistan?
I don't think that they will do it. And that was one reason why I was very apprehensive when Taliban took over Kabul. Because an Afghan Taliban government in Kabul, no matter how weak it is, it has emboldened other militant groups. And the militant groups that we have been fighting against, and we have in the past 2 decades, we have concluded so many deals with them, agreements, ceasefires. There is a whole, at least a dozen different agreements at different times in the past 20 years we have, and that's how we tried to establish peace there. But if history is any guide, recent history, past 2 decades, all these militant groups, essentially they are militant and they have one agenda, and that agenda is to establish a theocratic government. That is there. In Afghanistan or Afghan Taliban, they want a theocratic government. This Taliban, Pakistani Taliban, no matter how different they are, but their primary concern is the same. So these militant groups, having that in mind, that they want to establish a theocratic government, they will not abide by. So this expectation from our side in the past 20 years, repeatedly I think that we made that mistakes. Every time we sign an agreement, then we give them some space to regroup and relaunch their attacks. I think that we need fundamental shift, fundamental change in our policy, and we need to recognize that these militant groups have to be dealt with an iron hand, as we keep saying that iron hand, that proverbial iron hand. Where is that iron hand? I don't see. What happens? We use iron hand for some time and then we become lax. And when we become lax, these groups are allowed to regroup. And the same happened. Look at TLP also. TLP, we sign an agreement and then again they start march over on Islamabad. This is not the right up. Or look at Lal Masjid in Islamabad. We give them some way and then once again they start regrouping and they start asserting their power. So, sooner or later we as a state or government, we need to decide that whether we will continue this pacifying attitude in the hope of peace, or we will deal with them, and then this terrorism does not come up again. This terrorism threat has to be dealt with with a very stern response from our side. And that stern response we have not been given lately. When we did it from after APS for a couple of years, we saw that there was visible improvement in situation. And then in the past couple of years, once again we have become lax. So this is not a good sign for this region, and that's why I say that I was apprehensive about Afghan Taliban. When Afghan Taliban took over, that was a signal to other militant groups that if they could do it in Afghanistan, they could do it in other countries also, including Pakistan.
All right. Brigadier Saad Mohammad Saab, what's your take on the whole security situation in the region, and with particular reference to Pakistan and the groups with which Pakistan has signed peace deals or ceasefire agreements? Do you feel that Pakistan is on the right tangent, on the right path, or not? What's your take on that?
The Afghan Taliban on the February 29th agreement, the United States had given undertaking that Afghanistan will not become a base for attacks across its borders in other countries. Now, it must abide by those agreements that it had made, and Pakistan must ensure, at least on its side, that all this agreement is enforced in letter and spirit. Now, coming to the TTP is part of certain other groups which operate in the area. Some of the agenda might be overlapping, and incidentally, the TTP might be having an overlapping agenda with the IS. And IS is a very potent threat, despite some people saying that it's not a threat. It is a major threat in the region. The others are Eastern Turkestan Islamic Movement, which threatens China, Xinjiang province, and we have the Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan, which threatens Central Asia, and we have some remnants of Al-Qaeda also over there. Now, our primary concern is TTP at this point in time. The TTP is a terrorist organization, and appeasement and talks with terrorist organizations, they do not work. Exactly. The appeasement policy, we have seen in Pakistan, we have always come to grief whenever the government goes on an appeasement policy, whether it is against the TLP or whether it's against the TTP or other groups which are operating against Pakistan. So there are no talks with terrorists. That should be the principle of Pakistan. Now, those who have been responsible for killing 60 to 70,000 Pakistanis, including armed services members, must be brought to book. There is no two ways about it. Now, in the rank and file, there could be people who have not indulged in the heinous crimes that way, or they did not join the TTP because of some ideological reasons, but because they were unemployed or they were forced into it. So there, some sort of treatment given differently from the leadership. The leadership is an ideological terrorist organization. They must be brought to book, they must be brought to justice, and they must be made to pay for the crimes that they have committed against Pakistan. They are against Pakistan, they are against the constitution of Pakistan, they are against the way of life that we are leading. We should not compromise on these matters.
All right, Asif Durrani Sahab, what's your take on that? Should Pakistan compromise or not? What is the importance of the ceasefire agreements that are signed between organizations such as the TTP and Pakistan? And do you feel there is some kind of light at the end of the tunnel, some kind of a possibility that peace might come through such agreements?
I think, in my view, and I tend to agree with Vijay Saab, you cannot compromise with the organizations like TTP. How can you forget APS episode where 135 children were brutally massacred? They are not human beings. It was a savagery. So I don't think that those who think that you can compromise with the TTP on what? Would they give up their demands? Would they owe their allegiance to Pakistan's constitution? And right now they owe their allegiance to Mullah Abdullah Khan. And they consider themselves as, the ummati of, these followers of Mullah Abdullah. So they are also receiving ideological and I think other assistance, including financial assistance from Afghan Taliban. So I think we should have no illusions. My main concern is rule of law in the country. And rule of law in the country cannot come through appeasement. We should be clear about that. I think if you look at elsewhere examples, how LTT was tackled. They were ruling almost south of Sri Lanka in the Tamil areas. So how they had to, you have to take the hard decision. You have to, in fact, annihilate those organizations which challenge the writ of the state. I don't think there can be any compromises. You think that China will do these kind of compromises, or Russians would do like these compromises, or Iranians have done it? You think that Taliban are going to do compromises when it comes to their interests? I think so. They will, in fact, fight Daesh. They have been fighting Daesh. So the question is, what kind of compromises are we talking about? Yes.
All right. Thank you very much, Asif Durrani Saab. With that, we come to an end of today's show. I'll leave it open-ended for my viewers, for our viewers, to take their own, of course, apprehensions and their own understanding of this discussion that is very interesting and important in the whole perspective of the security situation in the region or the humanitarian crisis that plagues Afghanistan. Pakistan has been trying its level best, to control the security issue in its country and in Afghanistan, because if anything happens in Afghanistan again, there is going to be a trickling effect, as Shaheen Qureshi Sahab has said, into Pakistan sooner or later. So we need to understand that perspective. We've seen that in the past. We fought 2 important wars, and we need to realize and make people realize that the rule of law, the constitution, is what reigns supreme in a country, and this is what all apparatuses and all parties need to understand that want to or that have a stake in Pakistan, that for Pakistan and for the Pakistani people and for the Pakistani government and our agencies, it's our security that is paramount, and we will inshallah do the needful in order to make Pakistan a peaceful place and not have trickling effects like that if the condition or the situation of the humanitarian and economic crisis in Afghanistan continues as well. We are having an OIC important meeting on the 19th of this very month to discuss this very issue. Let's hope something concrete and tangible comes out of this. With that, I'd like to thank my guests, Brigadier Saad Mohammed and Asif Durrani Saab, who've joined us online, and in the studios, Dr. Nazir Mahmood Saab, a foreign affairs expert, to have talked to us in a very candid manner. And that is what we want to understand. We want to understand the perspective, your point of view, so that the audience and people can make their own perspective or ideas about what Pakistan is plagued with. With that, we come to an end of today's perspective. We'll see you inshallah very soon. Stay safe. Allah Hafiz.